everyone. Welcome to Design Together, a podcast exploring how designers work together. I am your host, Abby Ryan Guido, a designer and educator working in Philadelphia, collaborating everywhere. Today we'll be talking with Sara Hall, User Experience Practice Lead at the City of Philadelphia. Sara has a diverse background starting in architecture and transitioning to user experience design, as well as various stints teaching in higher education. It is a really unique path that I know Sara will be able to walk us through much better than I can in my intro. So Sara, I'm going to pass it on to you to share the story of how you came to your position with the City of Philadelphia.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. That is quite a long story, but I guess I'll start kind of pre-college, getting into architecture. I was born and raised in Delaware, which is now cooler to say than it was ever before. And I played a lot of soccer, and that was kind of my ticket to go to college. I just loved it. That was what I was known for back in growing up. I played since I was 4 years old, all the way through probably through right out of college. So I played for a good 20 plus years. And as I was looking at colleges, I knew that we didn't have a lot of money. So looking at colleges that gave scholarships was a big thing. I knew that I wanted to do something in like civil engineering, and that's where I think architecture came in, unfortunately. Not unfortunately, I think it's a blessing. But I went to a math and science high school and really wanted to get into civil engineering because I thought that was awesome. And as I started looking at colleges, I had this coach come to my house and he's like, "You should come to Philadelphia University." And I said, "Sure, you're going to give me some money. This is awesome." And he's like, "Well, we don't have civil engineering." And I'm like, "Oh, well, architecture is like that, right?" It's not like that at all. But what I did get into was, I got my goal of playing soccer in college. I got my goal of starting, and it's a D2 school, so we were able to still like do these really long studio classes. But what architecture started introducing me to was design, and I didn't know design existed. I also didn't know that I wanted to do design. So getting into that was really, really exciting. And it kind of kept me in school because soccer got hard, going to classes got hard. And I think around my third year, I was thinking like, I should just quit. And I did not, which was great. But architecture and design kept me in. And that really sparked my interest in like designing for things. Like you would design programs in architecture. And around my third year, I started learning about Buckminster Fuller. And we got into thinking about like who you're designing for, like who is this building for outside of like a specific audience. We were looking around, I started thinking about like, well, what is this user doing? What are they using it for? More than just, oh, this is a rec room or this is a room that, needs to have X, Y, and Z. So
yeah, I don't know if many like UX designers still know that a lot of the human-centered design grew from architecture. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure it was a really exciting time to be there, to kind of experience that. It's, even though it's a unique path, I think that we hear more and more about that transition because of that.
Right. And that's what I was thinking about this morning. I'm like, I've been talking to more and more people who have been in architecture or have thought about architecture and UX and making that transition. So yeah, I think that was kind of the kicking off. And through my fourth and fifth year, my fifth year was really interesting because you only have 4 years of eligibility to play soccer. So I was like free reign and I had so much more time and I just began digging deeper. I think the unfortunate thing was in 2010 was when I graduated, there was a recession and within architecture, you just saw all of our friends just move back to their hometowns, move back in with their parents. And I kind of had a feeling that I didn't want to go in to the field. I spent a summer working in an architecture firm with my mentor, and he was registered architect. He was just like an awesome person, and he was doing the same bathroom elevations I was doing. So I kind of knew that I did not want to get into architecture because I just didn't think like there wasn't much impact there. I didn't know what that meant, but
it's just like a feeling you had. Your intuition was this is not where I see myself.
Yep. And then a former admin at my school / he's actually a really great friend of mine now. He started teaching at he was an administrator at UArts, and I saw this program there, the Masters of Industrial Design program, and I saw what they were about, focusing on human-centered design, and I decided to go right to grad school, which hindsight, I don't know if I would do it again. I don't know if the resources for UX were available back then. So, there's a lot of boot camps now. There's a lot of, self-learning /
podcasts like this. You
Right,
can,
podcasts,
yeah.
as you can learn from. And, I do appreciate my education there, but I'm looking back and I'm like, does having a master's mean as much as it used to mean? I don't think so. I think that it really comes from experience. And yeah, so went through 2 years at UArts. I think it was a really great program. I think the programs there have gone through a few different pockets. Someone I teach with at Jefferson, the director of the industrial design program there, he went to UArts a few years prior for the same program and has a whole different understanding and different education than I do. But it was around the year or two before me and the year or two after me where we had the same kind of curricula and went through this program where it was really rooted into human-centered design practices, really getting to understand, and that really did a huge change in my life and thought. We started learning a little bit about psychology and reading books that I didn't think I would read about in design school, and it really made me think of what I wanted to work with and for, and I found extreme excitement and joy in working in social impact and the impact space. And when I my thesis was done with Penn Medicine, their HR department, on kind of changing the behaviors of staff or helping impact, their insurance payments, which seems really dry, but it was a really exciting project that myself and Alina, who was my thesis partner, she and I really explored food and how that relationship to, nursing staff and folks at Penn Medicine ensures how they impact each other.
I think it's interesting because you hear industrial design, and I think everyone automatically goes to. I know I go to Michael Graves, and I go to a teapot. I'm like, oh, so you're going to school to learn how to make products, and where really it was an education in user experience. I mean, your project was service design. It wasn't right. It wasn't. You weren't making a product.
Right.
It might have just been the time.
Right.
There was nowhere else to put that, and so I see how that landed there.
It's really interesting you say that. I don't think, of course, I like making products, and that physical thing of architecture, I thought it would translate more into industrial design. At least that was the industrial designers at Philly were so cool. And I was like, cool, I'm going to be one of them. But what it turned into is really, a lot of discovery, a lot of rigor in looking into research and looking to the actual needs of the people you're serving, and then figuring out how you do that in a way that works. Another client we worked with was this organization called Liberty Resources, which is they're a center for independent living. So they advocate for folks who might have different ability levels. There's a lot of grant funding available for people to kind of live on their own, whether they have, someone come in or as a caretaker. But there's a lot of funding. It's not just stick someone in a home. It's kind of if you have a different ability level, we can make sure that the house can be accommodated or an apartment can be accommodated. But at the time, I think this was 2011, they had to have, for certain funding, 51% of their employees have some type of physical cognitive disability. And that caused, not caused, but I think that they had a very, very diverse workforce then. So we helped them understand what communication looks like in their workforce, and we helped them write standards. But we started to explore some really, really techie things oh, well, we'll just give folks who have visual impairments an iPad. And then we had a conversation with folks who had visual impairments, and there's no tactical feedback, which is something they were really used to. And iPads don't really work great for them. So
right.
It was really cool to have those conversations and get rooted in understanding of you can change. And I think as I think about the work I'm doing with the city now and the work I did then, it's really we don't have a but. You have to work with the people you're serving.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't come up with the best, design decision because you think it's great. It's is it actually going to be used? Is it going to be sustainable? So yeah, so grad school ended. I said, it's time to take a break. So I decided to do freelance work, and I worked at a restaurant for a while. So that was, it was interesting to say the least. I think, I have some really, really great friends still from the restaurant industry, but it was definitely a different life and, a very, very interesting time because I spent about 2 to 3 years doing a series of freelance projects, a series of contract work, and it just wasn't as fulfilling as I wanted it to be. I really thrive when I'm working with people and working within, some type of greater good. So I ended up doing that for 2-ish years, I want to say, and then I decided, hey, you need to get your crap together and find a full-time position. And I did. I ended up being an information architect at a travel agency.
Okay. Does that title still even exist? Do people get hired at?
That's funny. I was talking to this with my partner the other night, and I forget what I was saying, but I don't think so because I think it's just like assumed. It's either assumed and like linked into like content, or it's linked into UX. And
Maybe can you tell everyone what that position looked like? Because I think there's going to be some listeners who don't know what information architecture was.
yeah, so I think I got hired because I had architecture on my resume as like my school.
So they didn't know what it was
either. And me going into it, I did a lot of it was the first part of the process. Like after the discovery, it was a lot of the flows, and it was straight wireframes. Like we had a visual designer who would really jazz things up, and because we were a travel agency, she did jazz things up a bit. But it was
I'm picturing lots of sunsets.
Yep. Yeah. We sold all inclusive packages, so it was a lot of those. So yeah, it was just really those gray boxes with a Arial font. 5 different font sizes, maybe.
So it was an early UX design position, really.
It was. And it was that and flows, and I really I was only there for 7 months because it was. When people talk about like their first job, it was my first job, and it was an hour and 15-minute commute both ways. I didn't drive at the time. I didn't have a car at the time. And I would take the Broad Street line all the way up to Center City, and then out to the end of the Market Frankfurt line, and then take a bus for 30 minutes. And it was a drag. The folks out there, they were really nice, but they weren't city people. And that was something like, I'm a city person and I enjoy the city.
Mm-hmm.
They were just like, you're taking the bus? What do you mean you're taking the bus?
I was going to say that there's that, I think for people outside of Philadelphia, there is definitely people look down on the bus.
Yes.
The subway is different, but the bus is definitely has a reputation. That's unfortunate.
It did. And I had a really, my coworkers, they were really, really great. But it just wasn't sustainable for me.
Wasn't the right fit.
Yeah, it was not right fit. So I ended up, I think 6 months in, I was like, do you actually want to do this anymore? And then I started searching for a job, and I had been in and out of positions and like freelance work with some of the healthcare systems. And I ended up looking into Jefferson. And this was at the time they had just hired a design researcher or UX researcher, and they were looking to hire designers. So I went in for that interview and I got the job, and that kind of started I've always kind of had an infatuation with healthcare and kind of that you can actually access people and you actually are helping people and it's great. And I took that position as I think the role was officially like an experienced designer. So I think one of the things that I talk to people a lot about is look at the jobs what the job entails, not just the label,
not
because
the title. Yeah.
Different organizations have different ways of calling people. And
I know I have to look, I bet someone's done it, but a really amazing infographic of all the different titles and what they mean to different folks, because it changes depending on who wrote the job description.
Right. And,
yeah.
And even if different organizations, it's very interesting.
It is, because I think sometimes I deal with, students, younger professionals who were my students who, might get a title of, let's say, I think the art director one is always confusing.
Right.
They have art director in their name and then they go somewhere else and now they're just a designer. Like, am I stepping back? I'm like, well, what are you doing?
Right.
It's not that title. And I think there's too much focus on the title and instead of what you actually get to do.
Yes. And that's I'm hiring now, which is great, but I'm not looking for a position. And I'm thinking a lot about that. So I'll pop around to different positions and see what they're saying and try to target. Because I know what I need. It's just making sure you're very, very clear about it.
All right. So Jefferson. And yep. How long were you there?
I was there for a year and 7 months or 3 months. I'm not sure. It was interesting. They had a really good and solid, it was interesting because I got to work with a researcher and then this person he called himself a creative, but he was definitely I was in the middle of them where I work really well with brands And I started getting into some project management, which is kind of what led me to the job at the city. Worked on some apps, worked on some, internal applications as well, some mobile applications.
I'm sure it was a fun place to be because Jefferson is forward thinking when it comes
Yeah,
to how technology impacts health.
I had a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of resources there. It just wasn't a right fit for me. And I think that's where I kind of understood, like, now I know what I want to do. Now I kind of understand where I want to, like, my interest. I don't think I fully had that. And I also understand that, like, if you're not happy somewhere, you don't have to stick around.
I want to dig into that a little bit. I know that we're here today to talk about
Hmm.
how folks work together and how we do this job as a community. But I also field calls all the time, and I just had one recently with a alum who's working, and he's not very happy, but he says, "I'm going to stick it out for a year for my resume." And, to me, those days are gone. Everyone is both indispensable, but also like you have to look out for yourself.
Right.
And how do you feel about that? Because I'm coming from, these kind of become like my children and I'm like their
Right.
mom, like you need to be happy. They need to treat you better. But
Right.
how from the other side, when you're looking for folks and you see that, are there alarm bells or is it, oh, this is just something I'm going to talk to them about?
I think that since COVID started, like, it's changed so much. I'm not positive. I think a year, I think having conversation, like, I would ask someone if they had, 8 1 year stints. I would have a conversation around why those decisions were made. I mean, part of it is like you could potentially have an issue with your employer and, or you could have an issue with the way things are run, or you could have an issue with like the ethics, the way you think, and that's, I think those are all, everything's really valid, but, or you could have just not been a great fit. And I think that having conversations around why you left is better, more than just making assumptions. So I feel like there's so much more. Like, sure, a resume is great, and sure, your portfolio is great, but what I'm really interested in is like, how do you actually work? How effective are you doing the work that you say you can do? And I think there's certainly places for everyone in that sense.
Sure. I hate the idea that someone would stay in a position that, is not healthy for them for whatever reason because they feel
Right.
like they have to meet that. And so it's exciting, I think, to hear your path
Yeah.
because look where you are now. Like it didn't stop
Right.
you. You worked
No.
in the restaurant industry and that was fine too. And I think people are so afraid of what their, how their past is going to come back. And I just don't think those are the days we're in anymore.
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting, but I also realize that, like, you know, I got really, really lucky when I went to leave Jefferson. Like, I am not ever in a place, I don't think, in my life that I'm going to be able to leave a position and not work unless, like, I win the lottery. Those student loans of 7 years of school are chasing me,
Hmm.
and they will continue to chase me until something changes. But it's okay to start looking and making sure that you're making yourself clear. I spent a lot of time thinking about how I can more clearly communicate my needs as a professional in spaces that I exist in, because that's really important. Like, I'm not going to sit there being uncomfortable, but I'm going to make sure that there's expectations set, that you understand that, as for me to be a good designer, for me to be a good design manager in spaces, I need X, Y, and Z. And that's something that I learned at Jefferson, and I've been actively applying at the city. And it's something that I think that all designers should really stand up for, because it's interesting. I think when there was a few folks that reached out and said, "Hey, I would love to go to this position." I said, "You do realize that you're going to be the only designer in that space, and what that looks like is making sure that you advocate for design, making sure that you help people understand." Like, one of the biggest things that I've done over, I think, my career is making sure people understand when the right time for a designer to come in is. And it's hard because there's the old, not old, I guess there's the
I
traditional,
think it is. Yeah. Traditional, you get it
right?
at the end and you dress it up.
Exactly. And that's not the way my
And
team can be that
no.
effective. And I think that comes up a lot in tech as well. Like, you can't solve organizational policy issues with tech. That's just not possible.
I want to say one thing because I think it's not just me, it's going to be everyone listening. I say it too, and I've heard so many people say, you said, you just have been lucky. And I don't think that's the case at all. Like I think, and I feel like we have to talk about that because I don't like the idea that you sit around and you wait for that luck to come along. I think you've built your path. You've done your research. You were educated. You picked programs you wanted to be in. You picked
Right.
projects you wanted to do, and you went after jobs. And whether it's because you met the right people, but you put yourself in this position to meet those folks. So I just want to say I don't think it's that you're lucky. I think it's that you're smart and talented and ambitious, and that's important to hear, because it's not about luck. It's about making those opportunities for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a really good point that I really forget.
No, I know. I think everyone does, because we want to. I think you don't want to have an ego. I think that's good. We're being humble. I got lucky, right. But I looking back, I don't think that's what it really is. I think we create our own luck in a way.
One of the things there's a colleague of mine, Leanna, that we talk a lot about, like, how important design is, how lucky we are not lucky, I guess, how fortunate we are to be doing design in government. And it doesn't exist everywhere. It's kind of in its fledgling places. It has existed and it has been successful, but I think the city has given us a really great opportunity. And Leanna's done a lot of work to build it in that space. She's the director of the Service Design Studio, which the work that they do is amazing.
All right, let's get into that. So you left Jefferson, you came to this, did you come right to the city?
I got a Slack message from my former boss, and he said, "Hey, like, I'm looking at your thing, like, do you want to apply for this product manager?" And I would have never applied for a product manager position
Again, back
ever.
to what's that title mean, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I took a look, and it looked like they had done a little bit of, they wanted a UX and like a product like person in the position. So it was it was one of the first interview processes that I really enjoyed, as tacky as that seems. I have my resume. I've struggled with getting together a solid portfolio, like site or anything like that, forever. Even like, because when I started, it was paper. It was architecture paper, and then moving into grad school, it was different. And I just never got together like a solid, this is a website that, because I always was challenged with that. So what they asked for was a few different projects that you'd walk them through, explain the process, and then this like design problem, because I was coming in at like kind of a manager position. I'd be kind of, how would you pitch a first, pretend like it's a meeting. And I really took that very literally, to the point where, like, looking back at it, I'm laughing at myself because I went in there and I had this fake project. I had this fake presentation. I like gave people at the table names.
That's amazing.
Like, I used gender neutral names. I was like, Ray, Pat, like, and I was, I really I practiced it because I really, really wanted this job. And
what did it mean to you at that moment to work for the city? Because it's different.
I had never ever thought that, like, I was like, healthcare is helping people, that is social impact, but it wasn't what I thought it was. And I think the city is a place where you're able to make meaningful experiences and do meaningful work on a day-to-day basis. And that's kind of like what I saw as that glimmer. And I think that's kind of like what keeps, like, when I have conversations with people in hiring about the city, like, I'm not looking for the next hotshot designer who has an ego. We're looking for someone who actually wants to, like, help the residents of Philadelphia. And that is really important to, like, the work we do every day, because it's challenging. Working in government is challenging, but the impact we can have and just the, like, reach that design has in this space is so great. And I think that the opportunities we're given right now is also, like, really important. Like, we are able to be on teams that are building applications. And I mean, Phila.gov is a huge testament to, like, how great design looks and content and, modern tech looks in the city. Because outside of that, it's like, this is even more during COVID, like, how people access information.
Yeah. And before we met, I mean, I was like, some of the apps and the websites, like, I was the big supporter of 3-on-1, and I knew how to find who owns what property. Like, Phila.gov is a very robust system, but also powerful. Like, I was amazed the first time I reported, like, graffiti on a building, and, like, within a week it was painted over. I'm like, man, this is working.
Right.
That feels great. It feels great to know that the city is putting that in. I think that one thing I do want to touch on is that there are so many jobs out there in UX, and we all know they pay well. You know, you go into the tech field, and the city doesn't have that type of funding.
Exactly.
So I want to talk a little bit about that. Like, you know, what are your thoughts to people out there who want to have an impact and have this career? You know, what are all those really great benefits? We started to get into some of them working with the community of being in a city and working in a city. And maybe it's some of the limitations, because I think that that shows growth too.
You know, I recently saw like on Instagram this like graphic that it was like a pie chart. The first one was like half is your salary, half is something else, and and then there's this other pie chart is like meaningful work
I
and
just
salary and
saw
things
this
like
this
that.
morning.
Yeah, I'm like I can't remember the exact things, but I saw it. I liked it because it's like I think design is kind of like all encompassing for me, and you know, I was talking earlier about like my soccer career, and that was really important to me. But now it's like when I talk about or when I think about the things that I do, like I'm either reading about, I'm now like finding hobbies that aren't design related right now because that's, I've been so engulfed in it. I think it's just like the ability to come to work and do meaningful work is so great. Like before I got into Jefferson, I want to say. I was having a really hard time finding a position outside of the travel agency, and I ended up reaching out to people in my network, kind of loose connections, and saying like, "Hey, I'm interested in working in an agency, maybe, or I'm interested in working in an organization like that," and having conversations with them and kind of better understanding it. But I think like what that helped me do is hone that like I want to work for an organization that has the same goal, and it's great if that goal is contributing to like the greater good, and it's great if it has like a local impact. Like so I started to like narrow down what I was looking into to getting into through conversations, and it's just kind of finding what, because some people might be really like, I had a conversation with someone recently and this person was like, I love UI and I really like, I love the art of it, and I'm like, that's not what we like. We are designers and we are capable of doing those things in the city, but we are not like, we have a brand,
Right.
and we have a specific audience that really needs to make sure that it's accessible from both a digital literacy, digital access, and accessibility standpoint.
Right.
So, you know, I'm not doing the coolest things in the world, but the access we're giving people is, I think, it over supersedes that in my mind.
Sure, and that's the thing, you know. I think cool, it's how you define it. You know, I think it's pretty cool to be serving such a diverse, you know, population in a city. I mean, there's
Right.
you know everyone. I also look and I'm like, man, and then it gets translated into all these different languages, and how must that impact the process? I just thought about this as you were sharing about your years playing soccer, and I'm wondering now, having your own team, are there things that you learned, because soccer is a big team sport? Do you take those lessons and bring them to your career now?
You know, I have thought about this because I was a goalkeeper, and what a goalkeeper does is it kind of, it's like the boss on the field. It just keeps people in check. You can see the whole field. You're very vocal.
Interesting.
That was my role. And I see parallels in doing that, and kind of, I think I wasn't a captain until like my junior year. But I was like the starting goalkeeper, and I always was able to like have an impact on how the team functioned, and communication was a big part of it. The communication in like soccer is like, you know, I think I started and yelling and
So you don't do that in the office?
no, I do not. Yeah, I think I've learned a bit, and like I read a lot about effective communication and how that works in the workplace. One of the things is like I've started reading, like I'm reading a lot of articles, but I started reading more books. And there's a book apart. There's one. It's called Resilient Management.
Oh, I know that book. It's
So
great.
I just started that.
I have so many book recommendations for you.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
But it's just like I want to be more effective with my team, more effective with my colleagues, and more effective with the people in the city, because I feel like it's like, how do we have to work together, and how can we do it? Like, it's just going to be nicer if we're working together in a way that is effective, and it's like chummy.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about that work. I know you mentioned phila.gov. I was hoping you could talk us through a little bit of one of your projects, who's involved. I'm really interested in hearing about how you engage the community. and what role they play in the design of all the different products you're working on.
It's interesting because there was a lot of groundwork done before. I think it's the time I want to say that myself and Jean Adamson, who's the content strategy practice lead, got into the city. Her and I got hired around the same time. I think she got hired about a month or two before me, but it started to be more of an investment into like moving this forward because it had existed as alpha and then it moved into beta. And beta.phila.gov was really just like a collection of the services the city had to offer. But when Jean and I came in, the mandate for us was like, Sara, you need to, not you need to, you should build out the rest of the product. And Jean, you're going to be working on migrating these departments from the old site to the new site. And that really kicked off, I think, a lot of growth in what we were doing. It takes time to do that work. We had a really limited team. The model of how we existed prior to, I would say, December of 2019 was different. We had a lot of fellows. We found, I think there was creative ways that the funding was found to, fund these folks. And moving into the Office of Innovation and Technology that happened in December of 2019, it allowed us to have more positions. So I went from having a team of a visual designer and a developer to have a fellow UX designer or UX fellow.
Which is crazy to think that was who was supporting all of, this product for the whole city.
Right. The content team had, I think, 3 or 4 content folks plus Jean and then my team plus me. And then when we moved into OIT, we got some solid, we got positions, which is awesome.
Of course.
I have a UX strategist, I have a UX designer, and I have a digital designer. And then my wonderful developer is now the phila.gov development manager. So she is just running a team, and now we have more resources. And that kind of bucket.
I gotta say, I'm so happy to keep hearing you say she's this person and she's.
Yeah.
So wait, go females. You got a lot of leaders in positions that are females. It's great.
Yeah, and I think that it's so great that we have this ability, and I think that it's something we keep a lot of I think COVID is so weird that it just really, it's been like a schism in time, and thinking about what our goals were at the end of 2019 versus it's like we finally have our bearings with COVID.
Now
we're not in the office yet, but we kind of can start building towards new, our goals this year. We've been talking about them over the last few months in terms of phila.gov, and it's a lot of I think someone used tactical things around finishing the migration work, making sure that we have documentation done so we can scale effectively.
Sure.
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, our teams are really small still. I think Jean's got 4 folks. I've got 4 folks, including myself. And then there's only 3 developers. And it's small. It's for the amount of work.
And I imagine that traffic to the site must have skyrocketed with the
coronavirus. It was not expected. I honestly was I think Jean and I did a presentation around what it looked like to move into OIT and how the work would move. Content would still be heavily involved in phila.gov, but we build out so much of the product that we would just help with some new components maybe. And it changed a lot. We were thinking of phila.gov will exist, but it will plateau and it will maintain. And with COVID, and these blog posts and vaccines and everything, we're getting testing. We're getting record numbers almost every other day, and we're moving a lot of these services that existed. You go in to the digital platform, and it's interesting. It's a lot of work. We are constantly evolving our COVID page and working with the health department and the mayor's office to get that kind of moving forward. But it's tricky because we have all that plus the work we're doing, plus the teams we're working on.
Sure. Let's talk about that community part. So I want to hear, do you do testing? Do you have people you go to share your plans? How does the government in this capacity work with the citizens of the city to deliver what they need too?
I guess we haven't done testing in a very long time. We haven't done testing since I want to say 2017. We had a few fellows that were able to do usability testing. And I think with when I say that number, I'm like, crap, 2017, that's so long ago. And the site was in such, it's infancy in terms of the amount of content we had on it. I think it was services plus maybe some departments migrated. But now we've got so much on there, and we really do need to do testing. And that's something that it's a known. It's just our resources are so limited,
Sure.
and the way we can work with our funding is so limited. So I think that, we are paying attention. We have a feedback button, which we do monitor.
Does that generate feedback besides angry people?
Yeah, it does. And we hadn't changed it until, I want to say, earlier this month, because it used to be, oh, I have it was more directed, but we do have more of a free form, and the entire team sees it. And actually, the content team brought up that we should probably monitor a little bit more closely and have our team work on it more directly. The analogy we've used is kind of like we've been building the car while it's driving down the road at 70 miles per hour, and I don't think there's any good excuse for us not soliciting more feedback for residents, but it's kind of like you need something to reflect on. And I think 2019 we said, okay, we need to do usability testing, and then COVID hit,
Right.
and now we don't have funding. And we were thinking about, the service design studio has a senior design researcher, and that person unfortunately just left. So they're hiring for that, as I'm hiring for a UX designer. So I think once we have more capacity, having conversations around how we can test better, because we have done usability testing with some of the applications we've been working on, but I think COVID presents a really unique challenge. Capacity presents a really unique challenge. Well, it's not a unique challenge; it's a challenge itself. But it's really difficult for us to get people. Like, we want to also do it in an ethical way, where we're providing, either a gift card or something like that.
Sure.
That
And then it goes
giving
back
us
to
your time.
resources.
Right. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to be having those conversations. Someone on my team is really, really interested in looking at like metrics and feedback and identifying trends. And that's something that we've kind of earmarked as a goal this year, is looking more critically at the data we have and we can use that's readily available. And then thinking of how we can start addressing some of the things we want to address, towards the end of the year, when hopefully we're not all in our houses, and we can test.
So when you talk about, people moving over to phila.gov and all the different departments, is your role to, in a way sell them on, because it's a change, right? You're changing how they work and how they receive information and give information. Is everyone on board, that they understand the need for, a system that is giving people the same experience and doing all the great things we know that good UX can do?
Thinking back to when Jean and I got hired, it comes to be really interesting. Like, Jean's team has done so much of that work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's, and Jean and I as managers have done this like kind of show and tell as we're moving from beta to Phila, but her team has done the majority of that migration. Like, you're going to a specific department and you're saying, this is it. And a lot of times it's like, this is great, let's do it. But it requires some capacity from the department as well. It's not, there are subject matter experts in there, and a lot of it is a content rewrite. Not We call it a migration, but it's a lot more than that. It's reorganizing the information. It's and Jean's team does the IA. It's defining potentially new things or components for the site, which we don't frequently come across, because we do have so much of it built out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really rewriting it. A big thing is like plain language is really, really important. The average reading level of a Philadelphian is the 5th grade reading level. So making sure that we write things in plain language that also allows for easier translation, easier comprehension. And her team does all of that work. And we support it with design.
Sure.
It used to be heavier in the sense that we were building out the programs and initiatives, or we're building out new components. But I'd say new components come every once in a while, and new page types are like, there's a few of them, but we can cover a lot of it with what we have. But her team has been like leading that charge.
Is this part of the Resource Finder framework, or is that a separate project?
I think the Resource Finder framework was like born of, I think, like, if you've seen atlas.phila.gov and property.phila.gov, those two applications, plus like the knowledge that we have maps, and a conversation that I think a few of us had around, like, departments were holding these resources that they had in these spreadsheets that we could sure do as a table, but that really wasn't great, because there's, you want place with that too. So that's where mapping came in. And
Mm-hmm.
we're working with a group called City Geo at the moment. And we started having conversations around like what that looked like to take this like self kind of organized database or like spreadsheet of information and place it on a map. And we had some conversations with the first three departments. We worked with commerce. It was called Clean PHL at the time, but now they've kind of rolled into the Office of Sustainability, this recycling and donation finder, and then the Office of Immigrant Affairs, the resources for immigrants. We worked with them to kind of decide like what are the buckets like you categorize these resources in, and it was easy for some, difficult for others, but we kind of created this framework that's really scalable and great. And that's actually one of the things that we're talking about documenting better, because it's all in my mind. It's in, a few of my colleagues' minds, and we can implement them quickly as long as we have data. So if we don't have data, we can't create the thing for you.
Sure.
So we were able to, like, I think that what I'm considering more of these advanced ones. So that's the phil.gov/food, the testing sites finder. Those are like the more advanced ones that have multiple variables to refine on. They have multiple, site types, things like that.
But they use the same basic structures, is the idea of
right.
A solution that isn't going to have to get reinvented each time.
Right. And that's kind of the concept that we've built phil.gov on. That's the concept we've built these things on that allow us to take such a small team and such a small group of people and really like provide an impact or provide services. We are now able to have those conversations around the resource finder in the next few months around like what works, what doesn't work. How can we improve this? This is, the baseline one. And then what is this one? And when do we use it? So they can almost be a little bit more not self-service, but like automated in the sense that we have enough documentation around it that you could have a meeting with someone, show them, and they would be like, okay, cool. I know what I need to do in order to get my data or my information in line
out there
to do it. Yeah. So I think that that's, we've really used the access and the conversations with our department partners to build tools that better enable them to communicate their services and things to, residents.
It's quite a powerful department you're in. If you think about it, I have different friends working in different parts of the city, and they might say, I'm in Parks and Rec, and that's what they're impacting. But your team really gets to impact everyone. I mean, you see all parts of the government.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes back to the conversation we were having about like, why go into, civic design when you're not going to make as much money. I think also the fact that your team is so small, your team members grow and learn probably at a faster pace than if there's someone who only works on this one widget on this one site and that's what they do all the time. How do you think that diversity of projects and things that happen impact your team members? Like what type of team members do you have to be good at that?
I think that you have to have kind of like an openness and like a tolerance almost. Like I have someone who does a lot of the production work and I think she's fairly happy with it, but making sure that she has what she needs and then also kind of has, she's learning or if one of the things that I'm working on now that I have a team of my own, a little bit more structured and time is like, how can you as a designer, like, what do you want to work on? What is something that makes you excited? Okay, can we get you on one of those projects this year? Or can we start doing projects like that? And I think that our team in general is able to start doing some of that work. Like one of my goals for this year is for my team to work on like 2 traditional IT projects that wouldn't have designers on it before. Like, so this is like rebuilding an application, and we've got one, and it's going really well.
That's exciting.
And it's kind of like, what does the other one look like, and what does that engagement look like? Because we are introducing UX to folks who haven't heard of it before, and folks who may have preconceived notions about what design is, and hopefully setting things straight, like in the sense that, we are really here to, help you, but we need you to stand and come with your expertise to the table. Like, your audience. I think when you spoke about community, we rely so heavily on our department partners and their interactions with with frontline staff and their interactions with residents, because we just don't have that ability to get to them.
So they are the experts. They are representing whoever they're working for.
Right.
Yeah. So you are having that connection. It's not yourself.
Yeah.
But I think that's the hard thing. I mean, you have so many budget restrictions. I mean, you are in a position where everyone is talking like, I'm paying these taxes. Why isn't this site working? And I think it's so amazing to hear from this side, like that your team is so small and that you do so much.
Yeah.
Is there a community of other cities and other UX designers that work for the government? Is there like a model, like if we could only be like this city?
I think there is, there's a conference called the Code for America Summit. There's Code for America, which is kind of around civic tech. It's not all folks who work in government, but it has folks who are civic tech minded. There is a book that I recently read written by someone named Sid Harrell called The Civic Technologist Handbook. And that's actually something I bought for the people on my team because I think it really outlined like the struggles / the rewards / the techniques / the value of working in government. And it's not just like the city of Philadelphia's issues. It's also, the other cities' issues. And I think that
Sure.
the scales at which they exist are different. For instance, Boston had IDEO come in and do a lot of branding and help with their website. And they've got a beautiful brand. We haven't had, we've done it all internally, which from my mind, like as Jean's team goes through and does the content migration, they're training staff in the department to do the work. So they're updating it.
Sure.
And they're updating their website. So there's a certain amount of ownership. And I think long-term sustainability with the work we're doing that will allow it to, not be dead in 5 years, if that makes sense. Like,
well, and I think that's how it was for a while. Like all government websites felt so behind, and it feels to me from the outside like that is changing.
Yes,
so which is good.
And I think Phil.gov will be an evolving product. It's certainly something like when I came in, there was probably 70% folks were accessing it through their desktop, and now it's around 50-50. So now we are putting more of an emphasis on making sure that every single design we come up with has a mobile alternative. So moving more towards mobile first, which is a little bit behind in the times, but making sure that our residents are using, their phones more and more to access services.
Sure.
When we think about the specific demographics of Philadelphia and who's accessing our products, like I mentioned, there's the plain language need, but then there's also, there's not high-speed internet everywhere. So making sure that we're not bogging down the site with these really, 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 really huge images. We've had I think that's been one of the more contentious conversations we've had is like, this is the site we want. And it's like flashy and has images. It's great. But like what that means for, our residents and making sure it's accessible isn't translated that way. So we try to find ways to make it meet the intent or do what we, what the ask is.
Sure.
In ways other than imagery. So it's interesting.
Well, this was really, really awesome, Sarah. I'm really excited we were able to connect. So I want to thank you for joining us. And for those that want to find Sarah, she's on Twitter. You can find her at the Sara Hall. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for listening. If you are enjoying our show, please post us a review on whatever podcast streaming platform you use. To learn more about us, check out our website at designtogetherpod.com.